Hey everybody, it's Dr. Erin here, and I'm popping in to introduce yet another discussion that we are having with experts in all sorts of fields in the lead up to our Words We Don't Say Anymore training. All the relevant links to the training, when it is, how much it costs, only $47, will be in the downstairs below. And please enjoy this conversation, share with your friends, share what you've learned, comment and share with us what you've learned. We love to engage with our community, and we really, really hope that we'll see you for our Words We Don't Say Anymore training. Thanks. Everybody, I'm Dr. Erin, one of the good doctors of Abbey Research, and I am super excited to be having this conversation today with Aprilynn Artz in lieu or in advance of our Words We Don't Say Anymore training. And Dr. Kristen and I know a lot of things, as you guys know this, but we also know what we don't know, which is why we like to have conversations with other folks who are chasing their passion, living what they feel they're supposed to do, and know a lot more things about other aspects. If you've seen in our playlist or on the YouTube already, we had a conversation with our dear friend, Dr. Nadine Thornhill, about the evolving language around sex and sexuality and gender. So we're here today with April to talk about the evolving language around autism specifically. So April, thank you so much for joining me today. If you would be so kind as to introduce yourself to our YouTube viewers.
Sure, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Aprilynn Artz, and I'm a licensed professional counselor, and I work in the state of Pennsylvania. And I have a private practice that is called Connection Counseling and Consultation. And it seems important to let people know that the way I sort of came to the point that I'm at is when I got out of undergrad, which I did not go for psychology. I've always been interested in psychology, but I went for writing. But I got out of undergrad and, I was in Pittsburgh, and it's not always easy to get writing jobs in Pittsburgh. It's not New York or LA. And this was pre-internet-ish. I mean, there was internet, but it wasn't like today. Right. And so I ended up working with kids, and then I ended up working one-on-one with kids with autism in their schools, in the community, that kind of service. Used to be called Wraparound. It's got a new name now. And that was really what ignited my passion for this population. And so I did lots of different things where I was supporting people in real time in their real life. And eventually then I was like, okay, I want to go back to school and I'm going to get a master's degree, because while I love this, I don't picture myself crawling around on the floor when I'm 65 years old. And so then I went back and got my master's with the goal. I want to become a counselor, and then I want to eventually be able to support people in all the ways they need support. So the folks that we tend to serve through our practice, they are folks who, some people we do kind of standard outpatient therapy with, but we also offer all kinds of other things. So we offer coaching for both kids who might be in school and need that kind of support, but also adults who are learning how to do life skills and keep their apartment clean and things like that. So while I am a counselor, I also sort of identify as an advocate, because my goal has always been, once my passion was ignited for this, I knew, okay, I want to help people, and therapy is one way to help people, but there's lots of other ways. And for neurodiverse people too, sometimes like the standard therapy model, it's not the ideal. So it's really, really helpful to have services and support wherever the person feels that they need them. So just thought I'd give that context.
Wow. Oh, thank you so much for that introduction and for talking a little bit more about what you do. Full disclosure, I was introduced to April through my aunt and my cousin, who April knows. My cousin is autistic, and that was such a journey for her and for my family to understand what my cousin needed, to try and find support for her in school and at home and through medication and like everything that could possibly be tried and or done was tried and or done to try and support my cousin. So that is how I am coming into this conversation, adjacent to it, knowing more than I think a lot of people. But I was thinking about this morning, like, I'm 38 and autism wasn't a conversation at all until much, much more recently. And when I was a kid, I think we might have had ADHD as a diagnosis or something similar. And I joke that like my whole generation was just overprescribed with Adderall and Ritalin because they didn't know how to do any more holistic help with neurodiverse kids. And like by the time I got to college, these kids were selling their Adderall and Ritalin to whoever wanted the medication. So we've come a long way in a short amount of time, I feel like, and I'm sure we have a long way to go. So if you would, share your thoughts or feelings or perspectives on how the language around autism has evolved. If you want to share what are some words we shouldn't be saying anymore or words we can say instead. I said this to you in our first chat. Obviously, we know no group is a monolith, and not every autistic person is going to feel the exact same way about this, but we're trying to build a way forward through empathy and understanding. And a huge part of that is language. So what do you have for me, April?
We got lots of good stuff.
Good.
So I'll start with sort of diagnostic categories only because within the time I've been working in this field, there's been some big changes. And
right.
Then we can talk about some like words that people really don't want people to be using, and also context on what people are preferring these days. Awesome. And again, so I've been doing this for about 20 years and a lot has changed in 20 years, which is good. It's a good thing. Yeah. So when I first started doing this work, there were 3 diagnostic categories that basically all kind of meant autistic, but they weren't all called autistic. So there was autism, and then there was also Aspergers, right. And then there was also pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified, AKA PDD-NOS.
Wow. I mean, I'm a fan of acronyms, but yeah, that's a doozy. That's a doozy.
Yes. And what's interesting about that is that it was clearly, I saw this firsthand, very confusing for people. So for example, I had a client, she was one of my first people who like really ignited my passion. She was like 2 years old when I started working with her, and I would go and see her at her house multiple times a week. I have such fondness for that time and her. But her mom would often say to me, oh no, she doesn't have autism. She has PDD-NOS, right? Because that was the diagnosis that was on the paperwork and that was given. But the fact of the matter was she was autistic. It's just that PDD-NOS meant, well, you have some of the criteria, but not all the criteria as we have it listed, right? And then conversely, and this seems to have died down, but I'm sure there's people who still have opinions about it. Asperger's is a thing that people who got that diagnosis, a lot of them really appreciated it. They felt it matched them, fit them. And, then there were things like calling yourself an Aspie. And so that was another criteria and category where it was confusing though to people who didn't understand autism, because it would be like, oh, well, that person has Asperger's. And so there's already a theme here, which is interesting, of sort of, and I don't think it was intentional, I don't know, of avoiding the word autism. Okay. which still persists to this day, which we can get to in a little bit. But basically, you know, it's like a lot of people are feeling like, why dance around this, right? Like, why want to say, oh, but it's Asperger's or it's PDD-NOS? Like, why is this a bad word? Why is this the A word? And then for folks who don't know, they changed the DSM. And so then they changed it and they got rid of PDD-NOS and they got rid of Asperger's. And there was heated debate about that on all different kinds of communities and perspectives. But I believe that the goal of that was that they just wanted to call it all what it was, which was autism. And then they changed it where it's like, it's autism. And then there's 5 sort of categories of how much support do you need. Okay. Still not perfect, right? I'm sure, like the DSM and billing codes and all of this is ways to make frameworks for systems that don't then focus on that individual person, right? This is about how do you bill insurance for seeing somebody and right. And you know, this is one of the reasons why we love having these conversations is because we are always trying to categorize humans, but we're really bad at it because it's really hard to categorize humans. Right. So that feels important, right? Because it's like things have changed and now it is autism. And so hopefully that's helping people to understand that a little bit better and not sort of want to cling to that it's this other thing or this other thing, because for some reason we have an association that, you know, this one word is the word you don't want to have that category, which is most unfortunate. Another thing that we really don't want to say anymore is high functioning and low functioning. Right. Yes. So those are really fascinating because, like, according to who, right? That's the first question, right? According to what rules? Like, what ruler or box are we holding up to say this person is high functioning, this person is low functioning? Right. Because I'm assuming that that language presumes that you're comparing that person to a quote unquote neurotypical or, you know, non-neurodiverse person. And that, I think, to me, sounds like a typical thing that we do in language. We compare things to like the standard when we shouldn't have that same standard for folks with autism. Right. And like, even if we're comparing to neurotypical, it's like, what's some inner experience, right? Like, we don't know that. So, you know, and I think sometimes this also ties into people's ability to communicate. So historically, if somebody was nonverbal or not using words in the way that we think is the normal way, then they might be slotted in this low functioning category. Right. There's a great documentary. It is available on Amazon, I believe, because I was just looking it up before I chatted with you. And it's called Wretches and Jabberers. And it is, it's all about people who use assistive technology or other means of communication who, if someone is looking at them from the lens of what is normative, they're going to say, oh, those people are low functioning. But then as soon as you're communicating with this individual, you would not wish to apply such a label. And also then highlights the silliness of these categories of high or low. Right. So I recommend that one. It's a good one to kind of like rock your boat about if this is a thing that isn't anyone's brain, watch that so you can sort of get your perspective shifted. Yeah, which is totally, this is a conversation my colleague and I, Kristen, have been having more recently, especially since last year we did some coverage of Oscar-nominated films, and Crip Camp was one of them, which is another brilliant documentary about the disability rights movement and the start of it. But watching that documentary really shook my perceptions of a person's ability to express themselves through speech and be understood versus their level of intellect and comprehension and understanding. Mm-hmm. And
it's a deeply ingrained societal bias that we all have, that if a person is not understandable through conventional methods of verbalization, that then says something about their ability to comprehend and understand and have an intellectual position. So yeah, I'm always excited. I literally wrote that down while you were talking, because I was like, ooh, I like to get shaken up on these things. That's why we do this work.
Yes, so that's a great one. And it's interesting just to see these kinds of things play out in real time. So for the past 10 years, I'm not doing it currently, but I ran a therapeutic summer program. And we had a young man who would come to that program who used a wheelchair and used assistive technology. And I would watch people interact with him as if he wasn't all that capable until they got to know him. I mean, he was brilliant. He had hacked into his school's computer system, maybe not the best choice, but he had this, the savvy and skills to do that. But people would automatically make an assumption about who he was and begin to interact with him in a way that conveyed that they didn't recognize that he was a fully capable person. Right. And then he would blow everybody's minds who had that preconception, because he's brilliant and an amazing human being. So yes, that's a thing. Another thing that is like quite hot and quite contentious lately. In fact, I was reading a Twitter thread like just the other day, and I was like, oh, this is good for our chat. Nice. Is the difference of saying person with autism or autistic person.
Okay.
Yeah, this is like quite the thing. And also as like a little other kind of side thing, on the spectrum. Okay.
Oh, like, yeah. Talk to me about that one, because that's one where Kristen and I are both confused. We hear mixed messages. We use it a lot. And then I saw a tweet that had a graph that was like, it's not a spectrum. And then they had this lovely little circle thing. And I was like, oh, okay, help. So
yes, I'm happy to tell you as much as I've learned recently, because
fantastic.
What's interesting about this is I recently got called out on this. I had contacted somebody, and in that I had said about, on the spectrum, and then the person was like, hey, this is ableist. And I was like, whoa, wait, what? I've been saying this for a while, right? Yeah. So what I have learned from some of the people I work with and people online who are advocates is that there's a perception that that's dancing around it. That, if it's autism, just call it autism, right? Okay. Don't avoid the word. Don't use euphemisms that sort of, like appear like you're getting at it, but you're just not getting at it. Which makes a lot of sense, because a lot of the people that I know that are autistic, it's like, get to the point, right? Like cut and dry. Like they don't always want to be dancing around these things, right? They live in a world where they have to play that game all the time, and it's an exhausting game. So it's like, just say autism. The other piece of this is that it's very easy for people to say, well, aren't we all just a little bit on the spectrum? Which that's infuriating to many people that I know, because then they feel like that is not recognizing like what their reality is, because it's like co-opting that. And it's like, have you been through what I've been through, right? Have you had to deal with things? Have you had to, so that's on the spectrum, right? Meaning like conversely though, there are some people who are fine with that. Right. And I think some of it's a timeline in terms of people coming to a point of like, this category, what does this mean for them? And then, what is their understanding of it? And like the difference between being early to the game and still sorting it out, and then like accepting it about yourself. Right. I do a lot of evaluations for people who are adults who think they might be on the spectrum, but have never gotten, I just said it, might be autistic and have never gotten that sorted out. And I can't tell you how many people that once we figure that out, they are so thrilled. Sometimes there's many feelings that go along with it, but it's like, oh, this answers everything. about the different things that I struggled with and that were hard for me. So there's sort of, as there is with anything, there's a journey to kind of coming to terms with what does this mean. But I think that for a lot of people in the autism community, once they know, then they're like, okay, this is what it is. And let's just call it what it is. And by doing that, right, then you are breaking down the stigma around it. You're not avoiding that A word. You're like, yep, autistic. That's it.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And as you were talking, I was thinking through, because we talk about through our work here, intersectionality a lot. And the idea that everything is an evolution and there is no one, set. So we use spectrum a lot to talk about gender, sexuality, like there's a fluidity to it, that it's not an either or situation. So in my head, that's what I was using on the spectrum to indicate that like, there is not one form of autism or one manifestation of autism in a person. But I think we can maybe find a different way to say that if it is something that, as you have been hearing and gathering this information, members of the autistic community would rather we just say it straight. But it's fascinating. I loved having the context of even the diagnostic history of autism to understand that evolution of language. So thanks for bringing that even to my attention. I've learned so much already.
Thank you. And I think too, it's funny when you just said that, I pictured something in my mind, which is, I'm pretty sure there's a graphic floating around out there that's from the, pre like new autism diagnosis category, where it is like an umbrella. And then they have PDD-NOS and they have autism and they have Aspergers. And I think too, that is where this spectrum concept also came from, because it was encapsulate all of it. And so that's gone. Right. And so yet another kind of reason why it's like, people are like, it is autism. I will say though, recently I sent some stuff out to my clients because I'll see good things online and then I'll share things with them. And someone who I see who's in their 20s was like, I don't want to be called an autistic person. I want to be called a person with autism. And they were, person first language. And I said to them, it's funny because I've recently been corrected in this other way. And so I said, do a Google, because there's like so much good stuff online about this. And so I think it's also a lot like pronouns, right? Which is like, ask how people want to be referred to. And then when they tell you, refer to them as the way they wish to be referred to.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And I know we talked about in our first conversation, this idea of people first language. I think it's an important course correction. I think we meant well when we were doing it. And I've heard similar discourse from folks in disabled communities who say like, they want to be called a person with disabilities, and like, no, like I want to be called a disabled person. Or, people of color and BIPOC and all of these new words and ways of describing people that we're coming from. So I think we meant well by people first language. And I love that you brought up that generational difference too, because I think that's so important to remember with language, right? Is it evolves through these changing contexts and understandings of the world, and different generations are going to have different interpretations of what that is and understand what it means to express themselves. And so I'm not at all surprised that your client in your 20s pushed back on people first language, because I work with a lot of Gen Z, and they tend to have more inclusive understandings in that way. Not to say that autistic person is exclusive, but that's an important framework to remember as we're always dealing with the generational aspect of language too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's also, I've been thinking about it a lot, and I think there's also an element here of like, how people reclaim words, right? Like here. So, I think that for a lot of people that have gone their whole life not knowing why they operate the way they operate, or why certain things have been difficult for them, but then they're like really wonderfully talented in other areas. When they finally get this sorted, then they claim it, right?
Yeah.
And they say, yeah, this is it. And now I know, and let's move forward, and let's not have like shame around this. And there's still a lot of stigma because, you know, I often have parents where I'm having a conversation with somebody who has like a very young child, where maybe we're going to get them looked at to see if this is the case. And there's still a lot of fear around that word. Sadly, I often have to sometimes still dance around it, because if I don't, the person might not move forward with getting evaluations. And I would love to live in a world where I could just say it and people would understand that that was not a scary thing, and that this is something that's been part of humanity probably forever and ever. And also that it runs in families. So surprise, like, you know, there's probably other people, maybe even you, the parent I'm having the conversation with right now. So I would love to get to the point where this is just like, it's part of life and we're not scared and nobody's trying to avoid it.
Oh, would that we lived in that world now, but I'm grateful that we have people like you who are helping us move towards it as best we can. I'm mindful that I don't want to take up much more of your time, but I want to reiterate what you said and then offer you a chance to add anything else. But I think one of the most important things that we can take from our conversation with April, folks, is to ask people how they prefer to be known, and how they see themselves and how they like to be referred to, and then go from there. We all make mistakes. April was kind enough to demonstrate that, but I do it all the time as well. And, you know, we can move forward with recognizing that we make those mistakes when we say words that upset or offend or hurt people and cause harm, and just keep trying to get better at it. April, any final thoughts on language and autism for our folks?
Yes, you sort of brought me to a new thought, which feels really important, which is that if you know someone who tells you that they are autistic or they have autism or however they convey it to you, please avoid saying, but you don't look autistic, or but you can have conversations, or, oh, but you make eye contact with me, or, oh, but you like to give hugs. No, thank you. Right? Like that is just stereotype after stereotype after stereotype. And it's really sad because, again, for adults who've waited their whole life to get this figured out, and then they tell someone and the person basically says, I don't believe you. That is tremendously traumatic and hurtful. So if somebody tells you this, please just listen, be interested, as opposed to applying, you know, stereotypes to that person, because you're just adding extra layers of harm and hurt.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much for saying that. I mean, I think the root of this conversation that Kristen and I started was kind of around this idea of stereotyping and language. And, you know, stereotypes run the gamut from not that harmful to very harmful, depending on the situation and the reference and who the individual traumas of that person. So yes, when anybody discloses any part of themselves to you, it's important to try not to see it through your lens and your understanding, and to move forward with acceptance and curiosity, as opposed to trying to categorize that and what you understand. So I think we'll leave it there. This was a fantastic conversation. April, thank you so much for lending your time and expertise. There will be in the downstairs the link to the fantastic work that April does. If you are a person who would like to have this conversation or needs to have this conversation about yourself or a family member, I'll make sure to get from her links to resources for support if you're a person with autism or an autistic person, or you think you might be and you need support in any way. So thank you, April, so much for taking the time and for joining us. And everybody else, we will see you whenever we see you again on this tiny corner of the internet. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.